Welcome everyone on this Thursday. Thank you for dedicating an hour of learning on this in-sprint automation workshop. This workshop will be taken by Victor Liu. In this workshop, we're going to learn on setting up and sustaining an in-sprint automation setup. So the agenda will be in the first 45 minutes, we'll have a presentation and a demo. And towards the end, in the last 10 to 15 minutes, we will go for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A tab, and we'll definitely take them towards the end. So I'm Josly, your host, and with me we have Victor Liu. Victor is a principal solutions architect at ExcelQ, helping clients navigate their journey to sustainable and reliable automation. Victor has over a decade of experience working as a consultant architect and product owner. He's on a mission to guide organizations large and small towards achieving success and bringing their goals and aspirations closer to reality. So welcome, Victor. We are excited to have you here, and the stage is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Can you guys hear me and see my screen, Joss?
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect. And we can see your screen.
Sounds good. Perfect. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody, wherever you might be. Welcome to our latest addition to our Q workshop here called Don't Be Left Out, Shift Left with Sustainable In-Sprint Automation. Today, we'll talk a little bit about in-sprint automation. What is it? What is it all about? What are the benefits about it? Some of the challenges that people might be facing in order to achieve that. Also, how we kind of, can interact with it, and how we can kind of do sustainable automation throughout our sprint cycle. And then lastly, we'll kind of go through a real world example of how we can actually basically achieve that same type of automation on something that we are developing in between a sprint, something that doesn't exist yet, something that we're doing on an app that that the developers are currently working on, and how we can actually do that on our platform. And then lastly, we'll go through a couple of best practices and then kind of open up a Q&A session at the end there. Okay, so I'm gonna just go to the next slide. So what is in-sprint automation? In-sprint automation is a software testing process where the entire process from creation and implementation to execution happens all within one sprint, all in an automated fashion, right? So in practicality, what happens is that, inside your sprint, after you've gone through your backlog grooming, after you've gone through your release planning, your sprint planning, and you've kind of figured out what you want to do inside your sprint, a lot of times functionalities kind of comes in and out, things happen, and then what you are kind of left to do is waiting for all of the development to be completed before you start your automation process. But with in-sprint automation, if you can do everything in parallel, from the development work, from the sprint planning, from the test planning, et cetera, you can do all of those processes at the same time. And then that way, as you can see on the bottom here, the benefits is you can identify and fix bugs early in the development phase. That means that you can, do your automation testing, you can do some regression testing, you can do, your test planning ahead of time before the development has been done. So then you can easily identify, bugs earlier, and then that way you can get them fixed before the sprint goes out, before you go out with your PI, right? And then also good coverage of your new feature right from the first build. So then, you're going through a couple of different things as you kind of as you do your sprint planning, and then you're adding new features, you're taking out features. It's very fluid. It's a very fluid process. So then with that, you want to make sure that you have the capability of developing your test scripts and your test planning at the exact same time, right? So while you're kind of putting in work, taking out work, developing new features, developing new UI, doing all of that stuff throughout the sprint cycle, you want to have good test coverage on that feature, right? Literally from the get-go. And then after that, once you kind of do that in parallel, you do your automation testing, you have good test coverage, you'll have a good quality deliverable after each sprint. And then obviously you have faster time to market if you can achieve all of those things. And then same thing with Josh just said. If you have any questions, we do have Harsha here in our chat. So if you have any questions with the context that we're currently talking about, feel free to kind of throw it into chat and we can answer those in real time. But if you have any general questions, you can save that till the end, and we'll have our nice little 5-10 minute Q&A session at the end. So if you have any general questions, you can feel free to kind of throw that into chat as well, and we'll answer them as we kind of go along. Okay, so that was the benefits of it. Here we have a couple of challenges, right, in achieving your in-sprint automation. So kind of with the poll answers that we saw earlier, it seems like, people have been able to do some of it, have able to achieve it in in a POC fashion, or just kind of do a little bit about it without doing a 100% fully sustainable in-sprint automation. And because of that, as you can see here, the challenges that we face as we kind of go through that process. So the first thing, like I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that the requirements and scope flux during the sprint, right? When you're doing your sprint planning, things gets moved in, things gets moved out. You're working on multiple things at the same time. You don't know what could be finished in the sprint, what can't be finished in the sprint. You could be pushing things in and out. So then traditionally, when you're doing your automation testing, you got to make sure that development has been done already. Your screens, your apps, your functionality, all those stuff has been already completed by the time you go and do your automation. But at this time, if you have things that are coming in and out, it's very hard to plan your automation testing at that phase, because like I said, things change. And then also in the same vein, you have your application dependencies, right? If the new functionality that you're developing is currently under development, it has not been released on the newest build. We kind of have a general idea of what we want to do with it, but it's not done yet. It's just not available. So then therefore, traditionally, you can't really do your automation testing on screens that doesn't exist yet, and applications that has functionality that has not been developed against. And also, in addition to that, your application dependencies also could be like your application goes up and down frequently. You have new builds that you need to push out, and then you got to bring it down for an extended amount of time. And because of that, your app's not available, so you can't do your testing against it. And then next, we have traditional manual and automation silos in QA, right? So not just our manual and automation teams that are in silos, but we also have our developer teams that are in silos. We have, other parts of the sprint teams that are also in silos. So therefore, we're waiting for things to happen on the other teams before you can get started, right? Like same thing, like I said, you have developers who might be, making up a new functionality. They might be fixing a bug, and then you have your, manual testing team going and doing all of those things that they currently do. But then, your automation testing team is kind of sitting there just waiting for everything to happen, and what we like to call playing the waiting game. And then once everything is done, maybe near the last 2, 3, however many days of your sprint, once everything is kind of ready to go, then you kind of scramble and you start doing your automation testing. At that point, you start doing your test planning, you start doing, everything that your normal test automation engineer would be doing. But then you're kind of left with 1 or 2 days at the end. And then, that's where that in-sprint automation kind of comes into play. And then I'm going to skip through a couple of different things. Technical debt on framework related, right? So if you have a custom framework, you'll know that a lot of times you're actually spending the majority of your time kind of fixing your existing scripts, right? Something changes, a screen changes, a screen gets updated, and a new additional thing gets added. And then half the time you're kind of spending your time going through what you've already have, fixing your 5, 10, 100, however many scripts you might have. And then say, for example, if your login screen changes or something like that, and you've hard coded that across all your different scripts, you got to go in and make the same update all the way across. And, like I said, half the time you're kind of spending fixing what you already have, and instead of actually working on, the enhancements that could be coming out during your sprint. And then lastly, we have technical view to automation disconnected from business process. So, a lot of times automation testing kind of comes last. It's something that, hey, it's not part of the process. It's not part of your definition of done. It's something that it would be nice to have at the end of the day, but not something mission critical. So then, it doesn't get done. And then you a lot of times you got to make sure everything's completed, like I said earlier. And then, it just becomes an afterthought. And like I said, it would be like a last 2 or 3 days. You kind of throw in there, you create some scripts, you get through your regression testing maybe, and then everything kind of moves along. And then now you start your new sprint. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about how do we achieve in-sprint automation as we go through our daily life, right? So like I said earlier, you're kind of going through your product backlog, you do your backlog grooming, you go through your sprint backlog, and you find out what exactly you're trying to achieve during that time. So I'm going to go and click on the next one. So during your sprint planning itself, with in-sprint automation, what you should be doing is you should be actually modeling and developing your test scenarios at the time that you're doing your sprint planning, right? So you're bringing in a bunch of different stories that you're working on. You know that you have the new functionalities that you need to work on. You know you have a couple of things that your developer will be working on at this exact time that your test engineers or your testing team could be working on. So ideally, what you have is during the sprint planning phase, when you know exactly what the stories you'll be working on, maybe it stays in the sprint, maybe it doesn't stay in the sprint, but at least you'll know what exactly you should be working on. So at that time, you can start your sprint scenario planning, your test scenario planning, and just start pulling in different parts of it that's already been done. For example, like you can already do some automation on your login page. You can do some other automation on pages that already exist, and maybe not on the page that exists now, but that's where that in-sprint automation kind of comes into play. Okay, so we have our sprint backlog ready to go. We have our sprint planning done. Now we kind of go into our daily work, right? So you get assigned a couple of stories. You're a test engineer. You're going through your daily life, and you're trying to build scripts for things that might or might not exist. So with in-sprint automation, if you look at the top left corner here, during your daily work, you should be building your automation logic in parallel to the application development. So as the same time as your developer is creating that new feature, creating that new screen, creating that new functionality, or maybe even that backend API that they need to fix and try to push out during the sprint, at the same time, while you're doing while they're doing that development work, you should be building out your automation script, your automation logic at the same time, right? We had a question. What is automation logic? So that's traditionally what your like Selenium scripts or Java scripts, your the scripts that you are going against your elements that you have in the backend, right? So it's literally like the steps that you'll be going through in order to achieve your automation, the buttons that you're clicking, the elements that you're interacting with, things that you're actually working on during the time, which, like I said, could not exist at this moment, right? The app team is working on a new screen or working on a new button, but it doesn't exist. So theoretically, you can't really go and do an automation test against that item because, it's still under development. So then what happens is, if you see on the very bottom of that daily work part, you kind of eliminate that application stability dependency as well, where, if it goes up and down, like I said earlier, if the feature doesn't exist, you can start your automation logic, you can start doing your automation process while everything is going at the same time. Okay, and then I'm going to go to the next one. So lastly, once you kind of finish up your sprint, you're going through everything, you've done your automation logic, you've gone through your automation process, you've created your scripts, the application is done, that new feature is done. Then at the very end of the sprint, instead of going through and actually, running your last couple of days, going through your entire automation process to try to, like I said, get it in at the end of the sprint, what you should be doing at the sprint before the sprint retrospective is then now you have your coverage analysis, you have your traceability between your different tools. You can see what exactly is happening. You can see which stories are currently being working on. What is the execution status? What is the development status? And then, as you kind of do your sprint planning and your test planning and your development all in parallel, you can see that visibility at the end of the sprint in order for you to kind of accomplish all of those tasks by the end of the sprint, right? It's not something that you, like I said, you throw in at the end. It's not something that, it becomes an afterthought. It is something that you want to do from the very beginning of the sprint, from the sprint planning process, all the way to the daily work, through the daily scrums, through the backlog and all the way through the sprint retrospective, right? Your automation should be part of everything, should be part of from the beginning to end process, all the way to the sprint retrospective, all the way to the next sprint, all the way to the next sprint backlog grooming. This way you kind of have a continuous process all the way through. Okay. So in our scenario today, what we're kind of going to do, like I said, is to kind of go through a good example of a real world scenario where you basically start from the beginning, right? We have a story that comes in. We have an app that's under test. We have the building blocks of what we need to do, but we're basically trying to put everything together, right? We're trying to mimic a real life example of what happens when there's something that comes in, a new feature, new functionality comes in, and then you want to make sure we can have that inside our testing process, and then going through the whole thing, and then all the way from planning, all the way to building the logic, all the way to execution, all the way to reporting at the end as well. And then you'll see a little bit about what we do. If we have a story that comes in, if we have a test scenario that we need to build, if we'll actually do an execution of the test itself, and then you'll see how everything kind of fits together. AUT is application under test. So then that's something that is currently being developed against. So then you have so for our example today, we're doing a banking app, and then we have a new function, a new feature that we're trying to develop that doesn't exist yet. And then so that entire app is your AOT, is your application under test. And then, if once that development is done, and then that screen now becomes available, and then we do the reconciliation with the new addition of the app, and then we basically bring that in, and I'll show you in a second what everything means. It looks like Harsha's answering some questions. Perfect. Okay, so let me bring up the screen. Okay, so our journey today kind of starts off at Jira, right? So this could be your requirements repository application. It could be, where you do your agile planning. It's where you hold all of your user stories, right? This is kind of where we want to start. So I'm going to go in, log into our Jira environment. I'm going to go into our demo project, and I'm going to bring up a user story, right? So for our example today, we are developing a new fund transfer page on a banking app, and I'll show you exactly what I mean in a second. So basically, think of this as we have a commercial banking app. We have, a lot of the screens done. We have a login page, we have a landing page, we have an account summaries page. We have the majority of the pages done, but we have a new feature that we want to develop against called the fund transfer page, right? So as a user, we want to be able to transfer funds from one account to another, or pay for expenses using the application. The fund transfer page should look like the attached wireframes that we have in the attachments. So, generally, this would be something that a developer will see, right? They'll get assigned a story. You have a quick description of what exactly we want to build, and then we have a nice little mock-up of the screen that we want to create, right? So this is the transfer page that we want to build. So this doesn't exist yet. This is just a quick mock-up. So then, like I said, we have the landing page built out. We have account summaries page. We have a couple of different other things built out, but we don't have this fund transfer page yet. So then we want to have these fields, transfer from, transfer to, the amount that we're transferring, the memo, et cetera, and the existing buttons. So this could change. I mean, this is something that we get, developer might get assigned, and then this could be, you add a new button, you add a new drop down, et cetera. It could be, this thing is subject to change, but, we at least have a good idea of what we want to build out, right? So with this, what we can do is we create an abstraction for our test scenario, and I'll show you in a second, is basically if we have a good idea of what we want to build out, we can start doing our automation against what exactly we're seeing here, okay? In the next page, we have a nice little fund transfer confirmation page as well. And then so also we want to know, okay, so there's some transfer amount, where we're transferring it from and to. It gives you a nice little transaction ID, and it gives you a total balance after your transfer has been done, right? So this is all theoretical. This hasn't been built yet. This is something that our developer is going to go in and build. And then so this is typical in Jira. If you're tracking your user stories in there, this is kind of what it'll look like. And then one good thing about here is I want to highlight is that we do have a nice integration with Jira. So then you can see that down here underneath Excel Q traceability, right now it says that we don't have any test coverage linked to this user story. So as we kind of go through our scenario, you'll see this status being updated as well. And you can see everything, how everything kind of works together from a developer perspective, from a test automation engineer perspective, and also, you know, with the reporting that comes out at the end. Okay, so I am going to log into our banking app. So I'm going to do #3. Okay, so this would be the banking app that we are working, right? So we had a nice little login page. We typed in our username and password. We have this nice little landing page, but we are trying to work on this fund transfer page, right? So this one, as you can see right here, doesn't exist yet. Like, you know, this is what we're trying to develop against. We have nice looking wireframes that, you know, our developer is going to go and create the UI, create the different fields, create the backend stuff. Everything that you see here on this page, on this app, doesn't exist yet, right? It's something that we want to test against, and it's something that could be developed and maybe tested at the end. But what we're trying to show today is that you can start your test automation process before this page is even completed. You know, we have a general idea of what we want to do, but, you know, it doesn't exist. So traditionally, you can't really do anything with that because, you know, like I said, the buttons, the functionality, all that stuff, you know, it cannot be interacted with. So then you can't really do our test. But, you know, with our example today, we're going to show you exactly how we're going to work with that right here. Okay, so we have our banking app. Now I'm going to jump into our Excel Q platform, right? So right now, you know, we have our developer who has the user story. They're going ahead and developing the app, the page. They're developing the functionality. And now for me as a test automation engineer, can come in and actually start doing my scenario planning at the same time that our developer is working on that page, right? We don't have to wait for them to complete their page. We can go ahead and start doing what we need to do on our side, the testing side, before they even need to complete anything, right? So I'm going to jump into my fund transfer. So in here, this is what we call a scenario on our platform, right? So think of this as your business process. Think of this as your use case, or if you're doing your, you know, manual testing. So this would be your steps that in order for you to kind of accomplish what you want to test against, right? So traditionally, you know, if you have a functionality that doesn't exist yet, you would just kind of write down, hey, I want to go in, I want to log in, I want to do a certain thing, you know, perform a certain function, and then I want to verify some additional items against the summary page or not, right? So I want to do certain things against it. But as you can see here on our scenario editor here, what we can do is actually build out all the other building blocks of that test scenario and only leave out this fund transfer page outside. So as you can see, all the other ones are already done. And this one says that the action logic has not been defined because that screen doesn't exist yet on your application. But, you know, our browser, our landing page is good. Our form login, our login page is good. Our account summaries page is good. Everything else can be already, it can already be scripted against everything except for that fund transfer page. So in our scenario here, we're opening up a browser and we're going to our banking app URL. And then I'm going to jump into our first one here for perform login, right? So I'm going to open up this context page. So what you saw a little bit earlier is the landing page of the application. And we have these fields for username, password, sign in button. We have some URLs. We have some existing things that already we can go ahead and automate against, right? So as you can see on this left here, traditionally, because we are a codeless platform, traditionally all these lines that you'll see here would be something like only a developer will understand, right? You have maybe Selenium code, you have JavaScript, VBScript, you have, you know, some kind of scripting language that we have in order for you to automate against these elements that we have captured. But in our platform, as you can see, all we're kind of doing is just typing in what we want to achieve, right? We want to say, hey, we want to enter in a username in this username field. I want to enter in a password in this password field, and I want to click on this sign in button at the end here. So I want to go ahead and interact with these 3 fields that I see on the screen. There's also other ones here. There's images that you can do some stuff with. There's links, there's other, clickable buttons, there's URLs, there's additional things that you see on this context, this login page that we see here that we're trying to automate against. But as long as I'm going to jump back to my application here. As long as these screens exist already, you can start building these out. These action logic that we see here, perform login, that you can start building these out. And then the good thing about it is that this is very modularized. So that means that if I build out this login screen and I have my username and password in a parameter, and I can put in, input different ones, different users will have different permissions, etc., depending on what you want to test. So you can start building this out for this login page, save it as an action, and you can reuse the same action across different scenarios. So that means that, if you have 5, 10, 100, however many different scenarios using the exact same login screen, you just have to do this one time, and you can start reusing this exact same login, perform login action all the way across your different applications, right? So you just basically pull in that action. I'll show you in a second what I mean. And then you can just reuse that over and over across your different scenarios. So the good thing about that, if you think about it, is that if that login screen does change, right? There's a new button that comes on, there's a new function that you want to test on that login screen. All you have to do is you can go ahead and click on your action, make your changes on this screen, add something to this action logic here, and that will then get propagated all the way down to your other scenarios. And that way, you don't have to make the same change all the way across all your different scripts. All you got to do is make sure you change this one, and then all your other scenarios would then get updated at the same time. Okay, so enough about the login screen. I'm going to go to what we are going to perform, right? So right now, you saw that we had a context down here. We had a nice page that we can interact with. We saw all the buttons, we saw all the drop downs, we saw the things that we can interact with. But because that this fund transfer page doesn't exist yet, we got to go in here and actually abstract all the elements that we can see here in our mockup, right? So I'm going to jump for a second. So we know that this fund transfer page is going to have a transfer from. This transfer page is going to have a transfer to. This page is going to have an amount that you want to transfer and a memo field and a submit button, right? So what we're going to do here is to basically abstract these elements in our editor, and then basically figure out how we can actually do all of these testing planning before the page is completed, right? So as you can see here, I'm going to go into my action logic editor. I'm going to click type in select, and then our AI is actually going to give you all these suggestions of what you want to do with your select statement, right? So I'm going to go and say I want to select an item from a web dropdown, and because I have no views, I have no context captured, it's going to say, hey, you have no elements to actually click on what you want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new element called transfer from, and it's going to be a web dropdown. We know it's going to be a web dropdown from our scenario, and I'm going to go ahead and create what we call an abstracted element that will then bring us to here. Give me a second. Transfer from. So we're going to create an abstracted element, which basically saying, hey, we're going to lay out the foundation of this step. We know we don't have a screen yet. We know we don't have these elements yet, but I'm going to put something as a placeholder so I can continue on with my test planning. And then I can just build all of these things out, giving it in here. So I'm going to give it a text equals to a nice parameter that we're going to be inputting here as well. So basically we're saying that, hey, I'm just going to put a placeholder here. And then as soon as that page becomes available, I can go in and actually reconcile that page with what we're working on here. And then we can go ahead and point in all of these abstracted elements with the real elements once we go ahead and do our capture, right? So I'm going to go and just keep going down the list. So we have a drop down for transfer from, and now I want one for called transfer to. I'm going to click OK. Then same thing, I'm going to do a text equal. I'm going to do an action parameter here. We're going to create another parameter called transfer to. I'm going to just go and build all of these scenarios out. And then so now we have our two drop downs done. I'm going to go ahead and say I want to entering in a amount. I'm going to click in amount. I'm going to create another parameter. I'm going to say that, hey, I have the amount field that I want to put in. This is the amount that I want to input. And then the new field will be a web input field right here. I'm going to say this is the amount of transfer. And then I'm going to do enter a memo. So I'm going to go down here, enter text, and then this will be our memo field. Memo field. And then in our elements, we're going to have also a web input for memo. And then lastly, I want to go ahead and click on a submit button. So I'm going to type in click. So as you can see here, I just typed in select, I just typed in enter, I just typed in click, and then it's going to give me all of these suggestions to go against these elements. And then, I didn't write a single line of code. All I'm doing is I'm just typing in the business process that I want to work with, right? So this will be my submit button. I'm going to click OK. So now I've basically created the logic against this page. I'm going to jump for a second. Against this page that the developer is currently working on. I'm abstracting all of these fields, all of these inputs that I want to do. And then at the same time, like I said, you're kind of eliminating that dependency with your abstraction here, right? So I'm going to go in and say, hey, this is all the logic I want against my fund transfer page. I'm just going to exit that out. I'm going to say that that's everything in there. We've created these parameters. And then, we can go ahead and move on with our lives with other things. And basically, we've already completed this fund transfer script as long as I put in all of these actions, all of these things that goes before and after it. And then because this script hasn't been, this functionality hasn't been done yet, you can kind of move on, like I said, and then basically wait for that to finish. And as soon as it finishes, you can come back and actually finish this up, right? So as you can see, before you can continue, it gives you a nice little warning here that says, hey, your elements are extracted. You got to make sure you reconcile that with a real page before you continue doing on anything else, right? So I just go ahead, mimic this field, but I can keep going to my verification page. I have some additional fields for the next pages. I have verify my account balance. I'm going to open this up. So, I've captured all the screens that I need to do beforehand, and I've captured all the screens that I need to do afterhand, all the things that have already exists, and you don't need to wait for this thing to finish before you start building out your entire test scenario. So right now, what you're looking at here is a completed scenario without that screen being completed. But as soon as that screen gets completed, like I said, you can go in and actually finish that up. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually import in a test case. I'm going to say that I have all of these parameters. Remember the transfer to, transfer from, the amount, the memo field, all of that. You can go ahead and actually create a spreadsheet that has all the inputs and outputs for that item. So once I actually do a quick import, and then it will actually bring in all of the inputs for those parameters that you saw, right? Username, password, to, from, amount, memo, etc. All those parameters that we saw in that previous scenario here. I'm going to click on this. So these abstracted fields right here, these action parameters that we're putting in, you can go ahead and actually enter them in as test cases. So these will be the different iterations that your test will be executing across. So then, you'll have a different transfer to, a different transfer from, different amount, etc. All these things will then get inputted as you go and actually do your execution phase of it. So like I said, now you have your scenario done and you're just waiting for that page to complete. And then now, say my page is completed. I want to go in and fix this and actually execute this test case, right? So I'm going to click on my fund transfer. It says right now I have no screens captured. What I'm going to do is actually going to capture the screen and reconcile all of these fields once this page has been done, right? So I'm going to set this one out. I'm going to go and say I want to capture a new view. I'm going to type in a new URL, viewbank@excelq.com. I'm going to say I'm going to open up this view. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to log in, John Todd, task123. I'm going to click OK. And then so now if I click on my fund transfer page, it actually says that my page right now can be captured because now my fund transfer page has been completed, right? So say I have all my drop downs, I have all my inputs, I have all my outputs, I have my submit button. Now my page exists. My developer has completed his work. Now I can go ahead and test against this. So what I do is I go in, use my record, a little record add-in here for my Chrome browser. I'm going to go ahead and click on record view. And it's going to actually grab all of these elements from this page right here. And it's going to save all of these elements onto the back end, right? So once you see here, it will say recording done. It will say elements, 153 elements on this page, right? Could be all of these buttons, could be all of these images, it could be these links, it could be these drop downs, etc. It's going to give me all of these items down here in my page. I'm going to click OK. Yep. So now I've captured my new view for my fund transfer. I'm going to go ahead and say save and done. I'm going to hit done. And then so now, as you can see, the color here is still orange. That means that right now in our action logic, all of these elements are still abstracted, but we have a screen available now. We have all of these elements available. We can do our test automation against the screen now, right? So all I got to do is I come down to my screen here. I can click on this element. So this is my transfer from element. And then I can go in and actually point this field right here directly to this field that we have abstracted earlier, right? So I'm going to go and say this is a web dropdown. I'm going to point that to it. Incompatible, web element. Let's say here, give me a second. All I got to do, web dropdown, transfer from, transfer to, save repository, hit OK. Cancel here. Transfer to, update, save elements. Yep, hit save. Okay, here we go. So now we have transfer from, and then now we have that directly linked to our transfer from. I'm going to click on this drop down here. I'm going to link this to transfer to. I'm going to hit OK and save. And then so now our transfer to field is saved with our transfer to field. I'm going to come down to my amount field. I'm going to right click on this. And then so this is my amount of transfer. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to find out all these DOM information for my elements. I'm going to go ahead and click save. And then so as you can see, as I'm reconciling all of these fields down below here, you'll see that this field right here is turning from orange to green, right? So that means once it's green, that means that you have a actual element that you are going against right here. So I'm going to go and say memo, click on memo field here, click save, and I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to come to my submit button. I'm going to do that, save to my submit button, save my save right here. So then now, once my screen is done, once all of my elements are done, once all of my fields and functionality has been completed, I basically just come back in here, capture that screen, and then reconcile all of these elements that you see here against what we had previously abstracted. And then now everything is green, and you are kind of ready to execute out this test script as we kind of go through, right? So right here, I'm going to click on this, click on this, click on this. Okay, click on this. Okay, here we go. So now we've gone through, we refreshed, everything looks good. Now that we saw that we had an earlier error that says, hey, everything is abstracted, now it's no longer abstracted, right? Now everything's ready to go, and we can go ahead and kind of execute out this test case. In addition to this, I want to show that, hey, as we kind of going through it, and we have a new functionality that comes into play, right? We have, say I want to create an email notification once we perform this transfer. We can kind of add that step in as we kind of go along, right? So throughout our sprint planning, if we have a new functionality that we want to work on, and it just happens to be finished at this exact time, and we're trying to add in an additional feature inside this scenario that we had built out earlier, all we can do is we can say we want to add a step before, and then it's going to give you all of these options that all of the actions that you have created previously, right? So then we have what we call a library action. What this is that you basically bring in this action, and you have an action logic against no context. It's just something that you want to bring in, something that it needs to be executed, but you don't need a context page for it. So what we're going to do is say, hey, we have 2 additional features that we want to do in this sprint. We have a email confirmation that we want to get that comes out from this fund transfer. So that means that as soon as you perform this transfer, there should be an email that gets sent out And then we have some fields in there that we want to validate against, right? We have a reference ID from the email. We want to make sure we want to go ahead and check that against our fund transfer confirmation, because you want to make sure all of that information matches up with the others. So then you can just bring that in, and now we've brought in a library action. And then now, if we have a new functionality that we want to bring into our scenario, we can easily do that with our library action concept. Same thing here. I'm going to do another one. So say you have an API that you've just finished developing at the same time, and then now you want to check your balance against your API and your backend. You've completed your transfer. You've gotten an email confirmation. You've already verified all the information on your email confirmation. But now I have a balance that I want to check in my API to make sure that my backend matches with what I see in the front end. So you can kind of use those two additional library actions, and you just bring those in, and that will just become part of your scenario that you can use for future. So I'm going to just quickly go through them. I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but I just want to show you guys how we would do that. So this is our get email library action. So you basically go in, you say, I want to define an email connection. You create a kind of a email filter. You grab the information that you want from there, from the email body, and then you say, hey, I want to grab the reference ID from the email, and that's going to give you a output parameter that you can use for a future step, right? All of those, cancel. All of those things gets linked up. So then that output from the reference ID can be an input from here, and could be an input for verification down here. So you can basically use any input and output from a previous step to a later step as well. And then lastly, I want to quickly show you this API call. So we can also invoke an API call directly from our platform as well. So you can see, okay, we're invoking a RESTful service. We're giving a nice payload of our username and password. And then we want to grab the total balance from the item. And then it's going to give you a action output from here called current API balance. And then we're going to use that item from here and basically going through that entire thing. Okay, so this is kind of our final script that we want to execute. And then to kind of save us some time, I've created one already on another project that's basically the exact same thing of what we just did, but I've already did my linkages with my outputs, inputs, etc. So it's something that we can just execute real quick, and I just want to show you guys how that would look when we do our execution, right? So on my page, I have what we call an agent sign up on my machine. So once I actually do my execution on this run, so I'm going to click on run. It's going to give me some whole host of items, and it's going to say, where do you want to run this? So I can run this on a cloud agent. I can run this on my local agent. So I'm going to do this on my local agent here. I'm going to say run. And then, yep, and then it's going to say okay. And then it's going to open up this agent here, and it's going to track my progress. That's waiting for agent, stopping agent. Here we go. So now it's waiting for agent. So as you can see, you have a nice little agent dashboard. I have this set up on my machine. And then as soon as I kind of sent out my my run right here, my agent saw that, hey, you have a run that's requested, and now it's in progress, and it's going to set up all of that information on here. And the good thing about the agent is that you can have the agent on the cloud. You can have an agent in-house built directly on your machine, or you can have an agent like set up on your VM or something that's inside your network. But right now, so my agent is doing my playback of my script, right? It's going to go in, open up the tab. It's going to open up the login. It's going to go in, perform my transfer. It's going to wait for an email. Hopefully the email comes through. We're going to just wait for a second. So I put a 20-second delay on my email. So then now we're kind of waiting for that email to complete. And then I'm going to come back to here. So we're waiting for that action logic to finish. But as we kind of wait, you can see the progress of the execution, right? So right here, it's going to say, hey, it's logged into here, it's logged into here. Okay, now it's gone back, and now it's finished the script. Okay, so this is exactly what we just saw on that playback right there. So our agent right there just opened up Chrome. It went through all of our screens. It logged in using our username and password. It went in, performed the fund transfer onto that new fund transfer page that we have just created. And then it, gave it an input of salary account, apartment rent, amount, also memo. It went in, clicked the button, and then also it generated out an email at that same time. And then you can see all of the information directly here as you kind of do your execution. And then right here, it generated out an email. That email reference ID matches up with the reference ID that we have on our main page. We also went down here and logged into our API and actually grabbed the balance directly from the API of this balance. And then we verified that balance against the summary page of everything that we have just performed, right? And then so I want to show this real quick. So as we kind of go through, it's going to capture all of the steps that it has just performed. So it went in, it logged in, it performed all these transfers. It put in all of these inputs, outputs, all the parameters that I went ahead and went in and imported from my spreadsheet. And then it's going to find that reference ID. It's going to click go to summary. And then now I've completed, right? All of the steps that you saw, that playback that just happened, gets captured in our screenshots. And then it gives you a nice little output of every result that happens and everything that kind of goes in and out. And then so we had a nice little happy path of our execution. But if you had an issue, right? For example, if this reference ID didn't match up with the reference ID on the confirmation page, or maybe the final API balance didn't match up with the final API balance here, what you can do is you click on this little bug button here, and we have a integration with Jira as well. You saw that earlier integration with the other integration. So then now we can actually directly plug that in and show you that, hey, I have a defect that I've created. I've gone in and executed my test case, and I can go ahead and attach a screenshot on my report directly to say, hey, I want to create a defect using this screenshot on this page, on this defect on my Jira application. So then you can actually directly submit a defect directly in your Jira application itself. And then one thing I didn't show was that you can create that traceability. Remember I said I have this traceability right here. So when I executed this test case, what I can do is I can go into my traceability page right here and associate a user story with that, right? So right now I have a linkage to my Jira project. I have a demo project. I'm going to go in and say that I want to associate this test case that I've built out, that I've executed against my fund transfer page story. So I'm going to go in, click this add right here, click done. And now I'm going to go back to Jira. I'm going to click on this exact same user story. As you can saw earlier down here, it said there was no traceability. But now I've just attached that test case, attached that test scenario, attached that test run directly into my Jira right here. So as you can see, I have a fund transfer scenario that I'm attached to it. I have one instance of run. I just ran it 4 minutes ago and everything has passed, right? So right here, you have one pass. And then if that had failed, it will say that it's failed. You can basically attach different types of things. If this spawns multiple test scenarios, you can attach multiple test scenarios as onto here as well. It doesn't need to be just a one-to-one scenario. And then once you kind of do that, you can see that you have that visibility to your test coverage here. And then so now with everything completed, we have our test script completed, we have test scenario completed, we have our test case, we've executed all the way through, and even all the way back to Jira, right? We started from there. Now we've gone all the way back to Jira, and we've updated our test coverage onto this page. So you can see that, hey, this fund transfer page from beginning to end, these wireframes, these functionality has been completed. We've gone in and tested our new functionality, and everything has passed and everything looks good here. Okay, so I know that's a lot of information, but hopefully that gives you a good general sense of how we would do in-sprint automation with our platform. Is that, like I said, you can start pre-build all of these actions out. It doesn't have to be built at one time. You can have your perform login done. You can have your email. You can have your API calls. You can have your other pages abstracted as well. You can have all of these things done, and you don't have to wait for this fund transfer page to be completed, because you can start doing your action logic here without this screen. But then once that screen gets completed, you go ahead and reconcile all of these fields with the screens that you see here. And then that way, as soon as that's done, you can do your execution, you can see your results, and then you can see back in Jira how everything kind of relates to everything ready to go. Okay. Then down here, I am going to jump back. I know we're a little short on time. I'm going to jump back over to my page here. Give me a second. I'll go back to here, jump back over here. Okay. So we've gone through an example of how our in-sprint automation will work. We've built out the flow. We've established a traceability with Jira. We wrote a test logic with abstraction. We reconciled that with the application itself. We recorded that screen after it's been done, and then we went ahead and executed and reported it, right? So that's kind of all of the steps you want to do for a sample scenario. And that just happens to be one story inside that sprint. It could be multiple stories on that same sprint. And you can go ahead and abstract anything that you want to see in that page. And then you can go ahead and do all of that in parallel with the developers working on the app at the exact same time. Okay, so we'll finish up with these best practices right here, right? So the first one is you want to ensure the entire QA team participates in automation, right? So it's kind of a team effort, especially doing Agile, especially during as an Agile team. Everybody's kind of part of the whole automation journey. So then you have developers who are working on the screens who have a nice abstraction of what you want to do. It has a nice wireframe of what you want to create. So then you have everybody kind of all jump in at the same time, and that way you don't have to have specialists on the team that does everything in a silo, right? We kind of talked about that in the beginning. Your app team doesn't need to be separate from your manual team. Your manual team doesn't need to be separate from your automation team. Everybody can work together. You can all start out at the same time, all from the sprint planning phase. And then you have all of that, all of that good parallel processing, all that parallel work process at the same time. So then you don't have to play that waiting game and wait for everything to finish before you can start doing your automation. Right here, we have some abstractions and visualization. So we saw that a little bit with our abstracted elements. You can go in, you can kind of just mock up what you want to test against. You want to mock and have that nice little abstracted test logic already completed. So that way you don't have to wait for that page to complete. Nice visibility. You have nice feedback all the way through. So then once you start building out your test scenario and I say, I have my login page ready. I have my confirmation page ready. I have my landing page ready. I have everything ready to go. All I'm waiting for is that one fund transfer page. It's good once you start doing that test planning at the same time as your sprint planning. So you know exactly where your dependencies are, and you're trying to eliminate that dependency by kind of working in conjunction of the development. So then that way everybody knows that, hey, at this time, we're just waiting for that fund transfer page. As soon as that is done, you just let me know. I can go in there, capture that page, reconcile my script, and I can start running it. And then as soon as I finish my running, everything will be done. And then developers can see inside Jira or whatever requirements application that they're using. Could be Rally, could be Azure DevOps, whatever it might be. Everybody can see that your test has been completed and your automation test has ran against that new functionality that you have just created. And then focus on test design and adapt design first approach. So, sorry, clicked on a button. So right here, this is where that modularity and reusability kind of comes into play. So remember when I said that you can build out a script for just the login page? So that way, if you keep that script confined in a modular form, that, like I said, if you kind of make a change to that login page, if you add a field, if you subtract a field, whatever it could happen, you basically just take that, you propagate that all the way down to your different scenarios. So then for our scenario in the fund transfer page, that perform login action could have been done, 2 sprints ago, 5 sprints ago. It doesn't matter when it was, you can just bring it in because it's already been done. And then that way you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. And then you can basically just take that, piece it together, and then just wait for that one little piece for it to finish. And then once that piece is finished, you just reconcile that with what you already have. And then you're pretty much ready to go. And then, like I said, as soon as you get that screen, as soon as you update those elements from that page, then you can start running immediately. And as soon as you finish running that immediately, you'll have that nice little feedback going all the way upstream as well as downstream. Okay, we have a couple of other things. I think with the time that we have left, I think we'll just kind of open it up to questions at this point. I think you guys will get a copy of the deck. If not, then you'll have all of these information from you. Josh, how do you want to continue on? I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover on my side.
Yep. So yeah, we are on over the top of the hour. So definitely we will be sharing the recordings with all of you. So that shouldn't be a problem. So we'll try to take one or two questions and then probably end it. If any of you have more questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A. We'll try to see as much as we can cover in this workshop session. So Victor, there is one question which says, automation test maintenance has always been a challenge in achieving in-sprint automation. So, how do you think, what should tools or frameworks need to consider when, dealing with such kind of hurdles when it comes to test automation, and how XLQ helps with that? Victor, you're on mute.
Sorry, I muted you while I was talking there.
Yeah.
Sorry. So one of the biggest things that I just kind of touched upon right now is that reusability and the modularity, right? So that way, maintenance has always been a tough part of it. You always are trying to make updates. What I was saying earlier in the very beginning was that, half the time we're trying to fix what we currently already have, and you're updating all your scripts that you have in your existing backend. You're kind of, maintaining your framework. You're spending all of that time trying to reconcile what you already have, and you're not working on what you'll be working on in this current sprint. So if you have the reusability, you have that modularity of it. Like I said, you just make changes to that backbone. You have a nice little, you have a good foundation of what you are building out, and then you have a good login screen. You have a good landing page. You have the things that are probably not going to change a lot. You have a good foundation of all of those scripts, and then you kind of just build everything else upon it, right? You can just add in an action, take out an action, all of that stuff. So then with our tool, you can build that in modular form and then just kind of piece that all together in a scenario. And then that way, that's where your reusability comes into play. And then also, if something changes, we have what we call a self-healing through our AI. So when you're actually executing out and say that login page does change, there's a new field, there's a new drop-down item, there, the field kind of moved around a little bit, there's a new coordinates or whatever it might be, it's going to realize that, hey, this field that's called username, or this field that's called password is the same field, but just moved a little bit, or, we renamed it or whatever it might be. Our self-healing capabilities will then take that and reconcile that with our existing repository. So that way you actually don't need to go and do a lot of changes. It's very good at detecting some of those changes. So you kind of minimize that maintenance that you need to do for all of your existing scripts as you kind of go along the way.
Awesome.
Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I'll run a short poll as well while we are taking the next question. The poll is around the biggest challenge you faced while implementing in-sprint automation. And I'd like to extend that while the participants are voting on this poll. So Victor, we have seen a lot of challenges, while implementing in-sprint automation. So what's your thought in terms of, when the sprint cycle is very less, normally organizations at times have a sprint cycle to be like for a week, right? So how is this all possible? How can we achieve the in-sprint saga in a week's time? What would be your suggestion to get going?
Yeah, so kind of like what we just talked about in this best practices piece. I mean, the biggest thing is that you want your entire team to kind of buy into it, and then you set the right expectations with the team, right? Everybody knows that, especially in a 1 week sprint. I mean, that's not generally the case, but 2 week sprint, whatever short sprint might be, that from the very beginning, like literally the first day, once the sprint planning is done, once the backlog has been groomed, then you know exactly what you need to achieve. So then just from the day one on, you say, hey, everybody, this is what we'll be working on. We know what the dependencies are. We know what needs to be created. We know what we need to be tested on. So then the test team can go in and figure out, okay, we have all of these things built, but we need these 2 things that need to be completed by the dev team. The dev team knows, hey, I only need to focus on this one thing. So then our test team can go on and do their own thing. So like, you have the right expectations with the team and say, hey, we're going to get this done. We're going to start the test planning early. We're going to start doing all of these things we need to do. And then also, most importantly, you want to make sure that the automation is part of your definition of done, right? It needs to be something that it's not a good to have. It is something that has to be completed in order for you to continue, because it saves time, it's faster time to market, all of those benefits that you see on that first page, that all comes with buy-in from the entire team.
So there is a question, right? What sort of debugging options XLQ provides in terms of automation? How can you debug, and what sort of best practices we'll use while debugging? So what do you think on this lines?
Yeah, so for when you saw the execution, I think I touched upon it a little bit about it. So we do have the self-healing capability of it, right? So a lot of times when the screen changes, it's going to tell you, hey, we couldn't find this element, or we couldn't do this input, or we couldn't do this, and that, right? So with our self-healing capabilities, like I said, it will find those minor changes in those elements and actually automatically reconcile that for you. So then you can basically say you run it once, it's gonna fail. It's gonna say, hey, there's an issue here. Please try to fix this. Either you have to update the elements, or you can use the self-healing bot in order for us to kind of go in. The AI is going to go in and find the differences and reconcile that for you. Or you basically have to go in there and actually, find out what exactly has changed versus what hasn't been changed, right? So a lot of times, I mean, it really depends on, it's very context based. So it depends on if it's a DOM structure change, if the element has changed, if the pages has changed, or it's just something that the application just didn't pick up. So, like I said, it really depends on what exactly the issue is. But, we have that capability. We have screenshots. It'll give you a nice report. It'll tell you exactly what the issue is, and it will tell you what the backend error is. So for example, like something that we did, we were trying to figure out, hey, how to connect to this database. And then we figured out it was, a security issue versus anything else. So then, you can look at the logs, you can look at the backend, you can look at all the error message that comes out. So, there's all kinds of different tools that's available to you in order for you to kind of reconcile your existing scripts. But, like I said, first step is the self-healing part. Everything else, it's a little bit of a thing on the test automation engineer part, but, everything can be done.
Awesome. So yeah, I think we are good with the questions. If you have more questions, definitely write to us at community.xlq.com, and we'll be definitely able to help you out and clarify more doubts which are open with you and we were not able to answer during this course of the workshop. So thank you, Victor. It was really a wonderful workshop. I'm sure for people who thought in-sprint automation is myth, by seeing the power of how it can be done in XLQ and the way you have learned the best practices, it is definitely something which is possible and achievable within your organization. So give it a try. So thank you so much, Vic. It was really insightful.
Thank you very much, everybody.
And I thank Harsha as well for helping out with answering the questions. So thank you, Harsha, and thanks everybody. Have a great day ahead.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye.